All right. Well, without fanfare or preface, we're going to just turn it right over to you, Patrick, and your team to give us your presentation, and then we'll hear from CBO, and then we'll discuss as laid out in our agenda here. So have at it, please. Good morning.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, Tom Kelly, PDC Chair. I guess you have to put up with me first before Patrick. PDC is pleased to participate in today's work session on the fiscal year 2016-17 requested budget. I'm joined today by Executive Director Patrick Quinton, Deputy Director Kimberly Branham, and Budget Officer Wizard Tony Barnes. The budget before you was created between November and January, is informed by PDC's strategic plan and agency work plan, which the board received at its annual retreat in December. All projects reviewed using guidelines by city policies, including the Portland Plan and the draft 2035 Comp Plan. The budget was reviewed by PDC's two budget advisory groups, the Central City Budget Advisory Group and the Neighborhood Economic Development Leadership Budget Subcommittee, as well as PDC's board members on January 27th. Letters from the advisory groups are included in the requested budget document. Staff, stakeholders, and PDC board members were aligned on key urban renewal area project budget decisions, which include complete acquisition of the U.S. Postal Service site in River District, construction of the Convention Center Hotel parking garage, implementation of the Lentz Town Center projects, implementation of the Halsey Wilder investment strategy, and the construction of Bond Avenue in North Macadam. Included in the budget and to be detailed in Patrick's overview are PDC's recommended general fund 5% cuts, as well as 5 decision packages that would add $1.1 million in either one-time or ongoing funding to the city-wide economic development priorities that align with PDC's strategic plan, including the Powell Division Local Action Plan and Small Business Increase Project and the B Corp program. As we move closer to the sunset of the active urban renewal areas and recognize the limitations of TIF to move forward critical components of the PDC strategic plan, we will begin implementing the work of PDC's Financial Sustainability Committee next year. The staff has been working on that, and we are going to see the outcomes of that first part of May, and of course we'll be reporting back to you about that plan. I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you, Chair Kelly, and you won't have to put up with me for very long. Truly won't put up with me for very long. I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly. Obviously, this is my last work session with all of you, so partly wanted just to thank all of you for the opportunity to work on budgets over many years. It's even though a lot of people don't like the budget process, I've always appreciated the scrutiny, but also the conversation, the priority setting. So I might be odd in saying I'm going to miss this process, but I guess I just wanted to highlight once again. This is really focuses on our general fund ask. We have a very short period of time today. We come back again to you when you sit as our budget committee and we go through the full PDC budget, and we can get into all sorts of conversations around URA-specific projects and how we spend our TIF. I think we really do want to focus on both the cuts that we put out, but also the ad requests. And Kimberly has been closest to that, and we'll walk through that. We do have on our that's right. You guys have our PowerPoint. So we do have on there on our presentation both our requested budget and our resources and expenditures. Just as a reminder, you can see that the bulk of our budget really is tax increments. So general fund represents a very small piece of this. It resides within on the second page, this intergovernmental revenues line of part of that $10 million is our general fund request. So much of this is TIF, and we continue to sit on significant TIF balances, cash really from debt proceeds that hasn't been spent. When we get to our to the to City Council sitting as our full budget committee, we can talk through the significant expenditures that we expect in the coming fiscal year. But that's all relates to TIF, and so you can see that on the next slide. The significant amount of property redevelopment, in particular, the dollars that we expect to go out in the coming year. And while we've been saying that annually for a while, I do think we are finally at a stage where between the post office, Centennial Mills, the Convention Center Hotel, the priorities that the chair mentioned, we will see a significant outflow of dollars in 16-17, as well as the increased housing expenditures. So it could be a record year for PDC in terms of dollars going out the door. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly. She's going to walk. There's a set-aside slide next. She's been close to that, working closely with the Housing Bureau on that, and then she'll walk through each of the general fund items. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning. So the next slide, and we did share an updated PowerPoint presentation, so I want to make sure that you're following along on the presentation that Tony just shared. So the update to the TIF lift, the affordable housing set aside, you see a summary of that right now, and that was put in effect to increase the set aside from 30% to 45% for all of the active urban renewal areas. So as a reminder, downtown waterfront, South Park blocks, and the Oregon Convention Center are closed districts, and so we maintain the same level of investment in affordable housing that we did prior to the decision to increase the set aside. The Central East Side, Lentz, Interstate, Gateway, North Macadam, and River District all saw some levels of increase. With the Central East Side, the decision to increase the set-aside came as when we amended and extended the Central East Side district, so that went from 18% to 30% of the new resources. Within Lentz, there was a modest increase. The most significant increase has occurred within the Interstate Urban Renewal area, where we are now at 30% of the resources go to PDC and 70% go to the Housing Bureau. And so we've been working closely with the Housing Bureau to think about how we can really have a comprehensive approach in that district and what our closeout strategy will be. Within Gateway, we also increased the resources by a modest $2 million, taking resources from the out years and bringing them into the budget and 5-year forecast. North Macadam, we are now at 46%. We had been closer to 35%. And then within the River District, there's an increase of $20 million, which at least $13 million of which will go into acquisition and securing affordable housing at the U.S. Post Office. So that's some context in terms of PDC's overall TIF picture. The next slide gives you an overview of our 16-17 general fund request. And I want to focus briefly just on our ongoing programs as a reminder. So we have two primary and complementary bodies of work. The first is the neighborhood economic development strategy and the work that we do to support our neighborhood and Main Street network. So we support 8 community-based organizations, primarily in East Portland and North and Northeast Portland, to deliver on their district plans, city general funds, and those go to support full-time staff people as well as a Vista volunteer and district and marketing. We also work closely with Venture Portland, who supports 37 of the volunteer-run business district associations. They're a close partner of ours. We have the Small Business Micro and Technical Assistance Program, where we support about 600 businesses annually. Those are primarily focused on serving business owners of color, business owners that have low incomes, and English language learners. We also have an adult and youth workforce program that serves about 1,000 people annually through our technical assistance providers, our local workforce development providers. And so that body of work represents 65% of our general fund, of our annual general fund resources. The other 35% goes to support traded sector economic development activities, and that's primarily individual business development for our cluster industries, so athletic and outdoor, green cities products and services, metal and machinery manufacturing, and technology and digital media. So we do work to support those businesses individually to help them grow. We also do industry-wide initiatives to increase diversity, for example, and efficiency within businesses. Within our entrepreneurship body of work, this has become an increasing focus of ours. We look at this exclusively or really primarily focused on inclusive entrepreneurship. So we just launched an inclusive startup fund, which will help support early stage businesses to grow, and those are focused on diverse founders. And so that's the context, and those are our primary programs that we've used to support the general fund resources. And while they are a small part, they are really precious dollars, and we leverage them as much as possible. So we did put forward 5 decision packages to meet the $268,000 cut packages, and then another $1.13 million. And I know you've been briefed on these, so I will go through them at a high level. On the next slide, page 5, you'll see that within the 5% reduction packages, we've ordered these. So these are from our top priority on down. So our first priority is a small and micro business technical assistance. Without this buyback, we will need to reduce one of our technical assistance providers. The CBO actually recommended that we take this cut instead of from technical assistance, from our small business technical assistance, from our workforce development line item, because that's a more sizable line item, and so we would consider that, or we would look to see where we could potentially hold the small business technical assistance program harmless, but we feel like that's our highest priority package. The small business working capital, we would take a cut here. We think we can absorb that for 1 year. It's a revolving fund, and so we believe that we could for 1 year not infuse additional capital. Southeast Works and VOES are both programs that we support, but given that the other projects have been competitively competitive, we secured them competitively. Our budget advisory committees recommended that these be on the reduction packages, and then Greater Portland Inc. is an important partner, but again, given the 5% reduction packages, we felt like this was something that we could put forward.
How much do we fund Southeast Works through other programs in PDC?
I would need to look at it. It's about $200,000.
This isn't getting all of their support. And then the other issue is for council that where we put a special appropriation to have safe harbor in a bureau, or PDC in this case, we should have a policy about that doesn't count towards its 5% cuts, and it doesn't get cut as in its entirety to meet the 5% cut in future years.
Commissioner, we support Southeast Works about $280,000.
Question, a comment. First, a comment, Mayor. Under the budget guidance this year, we did not restrict anybody from coming in and offering ad packages. And in a year in which we asked for 5% cut packages, we've received just shy of $100 million of ad packages. And I think we've learned something from that. And while you won't be issuing the next budget guidance, I intend to work with my colleagues to actually put a hard cap on that. I think that there should be, in fairness, where we're asking for proposed cuts, we're sending kind of a mixed message to the public. And no bureau has violated the rules in putting ad packages. But I think we would be well served to consider either a hard cap or a guideline subject to an exception, and an exception in a year in which 1 year we make the exception for transportation funding, another year for housing or whatever. But it does seem anomalous that we have almost $100 million of new ads we're weighing. And I think part of the challenge we have is that we're now being asked to weigh a cut with an ad package, which wasn't quite what the exercise. I mean, for example, I can't possibly support cutting VOES to fund B Corps. And so I will support, Mayor, I don't care where VOES shows up, quite frankly. If you want to put it in your budget, special appropriate, if you want to put it with the utilities and general fund money, we'll be honored to administer it. But with general fund money. But I don't care. We're not. This council is not going to cut this. And I appreciate that you have to show cuts. We're not going to cut VOES. If anything, we'll add to it. And it was actually a big lift to get it to ongoing funding. So this is a twofer. We're taking it out of ongoing and we're cutting it. But my question about your proposed budget is the following. One of your 5% cuts is small business working capital. And that one to me requires a little more drilling down, because what we hear consistently is there's a problem in the small business community getting access to that short-term capital. And it's harder and harder. Banks' underwriting standards are changing. It's more difficult. A startup business has trouble getting that working capital. Would you, as part of the follow-up, give us a little more information about all the programs that you have around small business working capital? For example, we cut some of those programs in Northeast to fund housing. So we've been adding, subtracting, shifting. I think to evaluate this cut, this proposed cut, it'd be helpful to know what's the total package from all sources of that small business working capital. And then I would appreciate some commentary about what is, in a perfect world, the right size of that. Because again, we hear consistently from businesses that that's very important to them. And one thing I think the data tells us is that a ton of people are applying and securing business licenses and chasing a dream in a smaller enterprise. I'd hate to cut off a program for which there isn't a better option in the private marketplace. So could we see a slightly bigger lens about what your programs are and how this would impact?
Okay, and before we get too deep into discussion, I do want to give Josh and Katie a chance to respond. So, I didn't want to cut you off if you weren't done, Kimberly. Okay. All right. So, Josh, Katie.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. I don't think we have a whole lot to add. I will just say that we recommended to fund VOES, not take that cut. And as part of that recommendation, we sort of postulated that maybe PDC isn't the right place for it. Just given sort of what their dynamics are and what they're trying to do. But we did recommend not taking that cut, and we also recommended funding the one-time funding for the Old Town Chinatown action plan that the city is committed to. This would be the second year of 3 to help facilitate that community as part of the city. I'm happy to talk about any of the other recommendations or any of the other ad packages or cuts that you see here, and what's sort of our perspective on those, but I don't want to take up, in the interest of time, I don't want to take up any more as we're already sort of pushing the limits of the schedule.
And Mayor, I just want to just clarify, we have stated consistently, I think since we submitted this and in briefings, our first choice is to restore cuts, and then the ad package is second. So we're not in any way advocating for ad packages, and saying we're fine with cuts. Right. So if there is an opportunity to restore the cuts, that would be our first choice.
That's a consequence of the process, not your recommendation. I get it. Yeah. Okay, Commissioner Small. Yeah.
So I had a question about the $400,000 ad package for the PAL Division Bus Rapid Transit. I guess I thought that project had sort of hit a bump in the road in as much as it doesn't look like it's going to be faster than the current bus service. So isn't it premature to be hiring workforce managers, navigators, and things like that?
So when we submitted the package, there was a different timeline, and I think certainly we would accept that probably at this point it would be wise to wait until we have clarity on the project. There is still, TriMet is still moving forward with the proposed bus rapid transit line. That's our understanding, and so we would probably look to come back to City Council sometime next year when we have additional clarity. I think the locally preferred alternative will be coming to you sometime late this summer, early fall, and we would love to, at that point, be able to have a conversation about how we fund the community development components that we think are complementary. But yes, the timeline has moved back.
Just to clarify, TriMet is now thinking about doing a phased project that would start with BRT on Division from 82nd East. And the community has made it very clear that that people in East Portland don't want a BRT project unless there are things in place that will prevent it from simply being a vehicle for gentrification. So I think that unless we are prepared to say that we want to pull the plug entirely on the whole project in any form, having continued investment in local action plan type activities is really important, because we don't want to wind up with a project that the community doesn't want.
Well, this is a gnarly one, and I want to let them off the hook a bit, because I was pushing this expenditure on PDC on the assumption that the project was moving forward aggressively. But it gets gnarlier than that, because if it's only the outer portion of the corridor, there's not as much value. It doesn't drive an urban renewal district as well. So it's a thicket, and we all need to spend some time cutting our way around in it and see if we can figure out a way forward. But the discussion is apt, which is if the project is not viable in some form, then forming the UR doesn't make any sense. I get that, but that's still an if, and none of us wants that to be the answer, I don't think. But we got to be realistic about if and when both before we make this budget decision. Other questions, comments, please, Don.
I just wanted to comment on Commissioner Fish's observation. You're exactly right. Small businesses are struggling with banks loans. The credit underwriting and so forth. I'm giving a talk on this in May. So the alternative to this is there are about 38 websites now where a small business can go and get a loan. Sometimes the conditions are a bit difficult. Goldman Sachs thinks this is the next bank disruptor and $18 billion in small business loans by the end of 2017. So there are some alternatives. I'm not sure it's as good as you all offer, and sometimes it's pretty difficult. The terms are pretty difficult, but there are some alternatives to the bank loans.
Just to add to that, our feeling right now, and it's we continue to learn from our work, is that businesses, the priority businesses we work with need technical assistance. They need kind of a package of what mentorship, assistance, whatnot, in addition to financing. So financing alone is never the solution for the businesses we work with, and so we can't do one without the other. So it has to be viewed in that context. If we don't have the assistance to provide them, then we can have as much loan money as you guys can afford, and we still wouldn't either get it out the door or do an effective job with it. It really needs to be paired with sophisticated technical assistance.
Okay. Other questions, concerns, Dante?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I would just echo Commissioner Fish and the other comments regarding the cut package request. So moving to the ad package, I'm just curious, because I had the same concern about B Corps versus the cuts. What do you see as the benefit to being a B Corp besides them being able to market their business? And what's the typical size and or demographics of who in this city are B Corps?
Situated to answer that question.
I think first of all, characterizing B Corps as a marketing program is off the mark. The purpose of B Corporation is to really provide a certification for companies that are giving back to the community, are paying their employees well. The community of B Corporations in our city have values that, for instance, supported the minimum wage increases. You see New Seasons, you see many of the larger B corporations supporting that. At the same time, I just want to say that, the vast majority of B Corps, I don't have the statistics, but just in my experience, the vast majority in Portland are smaller companies. There's maybe a dozen of the larger ones, but everyone else are small companies, and they're really implementing B Corp in order to be a better place to work, in order to give back to the community. I think that the investment is going to be one that results in a flowering of our business community, of our progressive business community. It's going to result in leveraging dollars in philanthropy and giving back to the community that we otherwise might not see.
I guess my question/comment would be, are we incentivizing folks? Are we trying to pay folks to do what they are doing anyway because they think it's the right thing to do, or are they doing this in order to become certified? I mean, what's the, on balance, how's the process?
I think many of the companies that have become B corporations have been doing a lot of what I'm talking about already. However, there's many companies out there that this B Corp movement will, they'll be able to learn about these values and implement those values into their companies. And I think therefore be a lot more viable members of the community, the business community, as well as the community in general. At least when we made the decision, my company, we understand there's some value from a marketing perspective, but it was more about the employees, more about expressing our values as a business, and the fact that we can be certified is that we can then really talk about it more, because otherwise, if you don't have something to back you up, that you're doing what you say you're doing, it's pretty incredible. We just went through a B Corp recertification, and it is a very challenging and deep process that took a lot of effort on our part. It's not just a surface kind of look at a company, and it has to do with things like how we pay our people. There's actually a ratio between the top pay in the organization and the lowest pay, and my company scored the best score on that, which I like to say is good for my employees, not good for me. So there's a lot of measurements that I think are in the B Corporation world that are very Portland-like and speak to our values.
And please understand, I'm not trying to minimize the value that it brings to the employees and the community when a company is certified and or doing that work. I guess just on balance as it relates to, are we funding those to a significant degree in their budget or work systems? How are we evaluating and balancing benefits to either side of it?
I would fund both before B Corp too. I mean, just to be really clear.
When you say small business, what size in revenue are you talking? Because I worked for a small business that was doing $6 million in revenue, and most people don't think of those as small businesses, but I know our category 14 million was a small business. So what size is this program? When you say there's a lot of small business, are we talking under $1 million, under 2, under 5?
I can't really answer that with any authority, and it's only what I see when I ever go to a B Corporation meeting, and I think the list of companies that are over 10 million in revenues is pretty short, and everyone else would be less than that, and I think there's a whole lot of companies that are less than $1 million. You have those stats?
No, I mean, just Portland, generally speaking, it's like 90+% of the companies in Portland have fewer than 20 employees. So everything we do from economic development perspective, with a few exceptions, is working with small businesses, and by even the federal definition, it's very small businesses. So that's the focus of our B Corp or benefit corporation effort, is to bring it to the businesses we work with regularly, which are almost universally under 20 employees. That's just who you work with in Portland. We just don't have that many companies that are bigger than that.
You do have to be careful, because professional services with 20 employees can do a $5 million at that experience.
Yeah.
But also in regard to your small business lending, just a comment, having been a small business owner for 16 years and having an MBA, so I understand what's needed to run a business. And it's unfortunate. I'm sure we're getting a lot of people saying we don't get a loan, we can't access a loan. But often most of them aren't well equipped even to be asking for the loan. They don't understand their business. And this is from talking with people. I always said that one of the things I always wanted to volunteer with some of the nonprofits was teaching people what payroll laws, wage and hour laws were for especially these minority companies, because they are clueless on the legalities of running a business. So the fact that they can't say that can access it, often you have to drill down a lot deeper. But another question I have on your Southeast Worth Youth, I noticed it's for helping GEDs, etc. Are you coordinating with schools in the area? I know at David Douglas, our alternative program works with students. Not all of them go for diploma. Some of them go for GED. So are you working together with them? Because I see a synergy there.
Southeast Works primarily focuses this program on disconnected youth, so youth that are no longer connected. But I know that they have deep relationships in the community, and so I'm sure that there are some synergies there. But we can follow up with that particular program.
I think it's good because if we can pull them back into the school, which we try to with our alternative programs in different ways, it's better for the community, better for the student, because they get a slightly better education if they're in the school environment. Thank you.
Responses needed? If not, Tom, thank you very much. Patrick, Kimberly, thank you very much. Appreciate Tony. Thank you all. And we'll move on. Patrick, your last budget discussion was mercifully brief. So. Appreciate that impressive list of projects that Patrick is working on in his remaining time in this role. Going out in a blaze of glory. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on to the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I see Susan is here and others on her team, so come on up.
Thanks. Susan Anderson, Director of the Bureau of Development of Planning and Sustainability. And with me are Michael Armstrong, Joe Zunder, and our honorary member, Linda Netikoven, who representing our Budget Advisory Committee. I'm going to spend 6 or 7 minutes giving you an overview, and then we can have Linda say a few words and get on to your questions. For the past 2 years, BPS has completed some very large and landmark plans, the Portland Plan, the Climate Action Plan, soon the new Comprehensive Plan, and later this year the new Central City Plan. So we've been up in the policy world for a couple of years. We are now moving down into implementation down in the streets, neighborhoods. So we've been sort of head in the clouds, we're back feet on the ground. And we haven't wasted any time getting started. In fact, as you already know, we have several sort of parallel projects underway, a draft code for mixed-use zones, a new draft code for institutional zones, a draft code for the new Central City Plan. Those 3 projects are starting to move through the Planning and Sustainability Commission right now, and they'll come to you one after another in the next several months. Also moving along is the residential infill project, which I'll mention in a few minutes. And then starting this summer, we will begin 3 new major projects, the multifamily zoning code project, which we're doing with a grant from Metro, work on community design standards in the design review process, and then some code refinements for 82nd Avenue, working closely with the Housing Bureau and PDC. Again, that one is funded by Metro. We also always have a handful of others, sometimes several handfuls of other small projects, from Northwest Parking District to, I don't know that this is going to be small, but inclusionary zoning. Things pop up consistently throughout the year as one-time projects, and those are other things that we are moving into doing a whole lot more than doing the big picture plans. That's not to mention all of the things that are going on with sustainability, energy efficiency, solar, green building, making sure the trash and the recycling and the composting gets picked up. We do a very efficient job in the city. Under BPS management, rates have been flat and or reduced over the past 3 or 4 years, and I don't know any electric, gas, water, sewer utility that can say that. So I think we're doing a good job in a partnership with the local solid waste companies. Instead of walking through each one of the cuts and ad packages that are there, I thought that I'd just focus on a few. Overall, for our budget, if you look at the page that has the big pie chart like this, you can see where our funding comes from. About half of our funds come from general fund, a large portion from the solid waste management fund, and then the rest from grants and contracts and one-time general fund. On the flip side of that page, there is sort of a history of our funding, both from FTE perspective and from where general fund resources came from. You can see back 6 or 7 years ago during the recession, we had to lay off more than 25 planning positions that were eliminated over a couple of years because in the past, as much as $3 or $4 million in one-time annual funds were used to fund the old planning bureau. We now have about 10 to 15% of our positions still funded on one-time and or grant or interagency kind of fundings that are very volatile. So let me go through a couple of our requests, starting with our first ad package, and that one is called the Single Dwelling Development Code Project. You all probably know it as the Residential Infill project. We have requested $360,000 in one-time funding. After more discussion with the Budget Advisory Committee, with some of you and in the community, my proposal is actually to shift that from general fund from one-time general fund to ongoing, and there's several reasons for that. Each year, as I just mentioned, we come in with a priority project from City Council, and it's often $300,000 or $400,000. It might be as much as $700,000 or $800,000, and then we have to come back again the next year, and the next year, and the next year, and it's a very volatile way for us to run our department. We have had staff in recent years, the past 2 years, leave because they have been literally every year in December, they get notice because of either they're one of the lower, younger, often minority employees who have been more recently hired, and they are given notice in December and have to wait until May or June to find out if they still have a job. And so some of those folks have left in the past couple of years. It wasn't a big deal in the recession because there was nowhere to go, but now there are jobs out there, and we're beginning to lose some of those folks. And we have great staff, and so they get hired pretty easily. So I kind of want to get off that roller coaster if possible. Another decision package that you have in front of you is for $175,000 for the comprehensive plan. This is a really good example of a true one-time expense. It includes all the public noticing, the staffing for the hotline, funds for PBOT to finish up the last bits of the TSP to get the entire comp plan done. And then the third request I want to mention is called Community Design Standards and Design Review, the Design Overlay Zone Assessment Project. This request is currently listed for one-time general fund. That does make sense, but I think a stronger case can be made for funding the project using BDS land use fees, similar to how RECAP is funded. It's totally appropriate to use land use fees to cover the cost for ongoing code development, for refinement, and for code improvement projects. And then the fourth item that I just want to mention is our cut package. You requested nearly $400,000 in cuts. We need our demographer that's in there. That person works closely with Andrew's team, with OMF, with a lot of others, in providing good base information. We need staff for the Central City Plan. If you are going to look at taking one of those cuts, I would say that the least harmful cut at this point would be to eliminate one FTE that works on transportation, affordable housing, land use connections around the Barber project and the PAL division project. And again, that's because that position is vacant because that person went to work for Fred Miller and moved over to OMF because she was one of those people that was year after year being kind of tossed about, and she wasn't feeling that valued because we couldn't keep her in that position. She would have rather stayed. I think I'll wrap up just by saying my priorities in terms of requests are, don't take our cuts if possible. If you need to take one, take the FTE that's already vacant. Shift our request for $360,000 in one-time funding to ongoing. Think about inclusionary zoning as part of that too. We may need to up that a little bit. And then fund the completion of the comprehensive plan. I think that's it. I'll stop there and then let Linda say a few words and then answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Hales and commissioners and budget committee members. I'm Linda Nedekoven, speaking on behalf of the BPS Budget Advisory Committee, and I'll probably be emphasizing a number of the points that Susan made, but This is coming from the community side of the equation. First, a little bit about the BAC. We have expertise in that group on anti-displacement strategies, public health, sustainable development, transportation planning, a real range of backgrounds and professional connections. And these are folks that are very knowledgeable about the affordable housing crisis, care about it very much, and are looking for solutions. I want to say that as preface to my first comment, which is to say that the BAC recommends that you don't take any of the nearly $400,000 in cuts that we identified. We really want to emphasize the things that Susan has said about stable funding. A number of us have been on the committee for several years and have watched that roller coaster in effect. The Bureau's been consistently relying on one-time funds for as many as 10 positions each year. And if we truly care about affordable housing, we need to make sure that projects which help plan for more housing overall continue to be funded. Affordable housing isn't just about the money to build more units, as important as that is, but we also need a comprehensive approach to make sure that the planning framework is solid so there's more supply overall and for many years to come, and planning plays an integral role in this. Second, we recommend, as Susan mentioned, that you shift from general fund to using revenue from BDS land use fees to pay for ongoing code refinement and improvement projects. Think of things like the RECAP, the Regulatory Improvement Code Amendment Package, for those of you who never can remember what it stands for like me. The design standards update, which is woefully late in coming. This should have been done years ago, and other code-related projects. Third, please provide funding to finish the two projects that are currently underway, residential infill and the comprehensive plan. These are both essential, and we've tried to work with the Bureau as closely as we could to ensure that the budgets for these two are reasonable. Finally, again, please seek ways to provide some additional ongoing funding, either through allocation of additional general funds or through the appropriate use of BDS land use fees for code-related kinds of improvements. I just really want to emphasize, again, having watched this over several years, that we can't afford to go around losing qualified staff. A lot of our equity work, if nothing else, depends on relationships. And when you have folks that end up leaving because they can get a more secure position in another bureau, another jurisdiction, or in the private sector, you also not only lose that expertise, but you lose those valuable relationships. So there has to be a better way to fund our planning bureau, Planning and Sustainability Bureau. Thank you very much.
Can I just add 2 quick points? One is I handed out our strategic plan, slim as it is, and on the back 2 pages in the end you can see our top 12 initiatives for the 3 years. We're 2 years in, and most of those have been done. And so I just feel really good about, we are a planning organization, we are a strategic planning organization, and very much laying out exactly what we're going to do, and in general we're delivering. And then the second item that Linda also just mentioned is that 4 years ago, I stopped and looked at our organization and felt the need to hire an equity person who could focus on the work. We're in the community so much, and what we do affects all the people in the community, and we are not going to reach our sustainability goals. We're not going to reach our planning and other livability goals unless everyone is part of that equation. And so I actually switched a planner position to the equity position 4 years ago. And I know since then people have come in the different bureaus and asked as a one-time or as an ongoing funding for a new position for that. And we embedded that position early. And so I just think that's important. Thanks.
Sure. Hello again, Jessica Kennard, the City Budget Office. I'm going to briefly just walk through City Budget Office's recommendations. So we recommended partially funding the completion of the Single Dwelling Development Code project, which is the continuation of the residential infill project from last year, the current year. In the current year, BPS received a little over $482,000. At the time that this was proposed, it was estimated that this project would continue into 16-17 and that it would require roughly an additional $100,000 to be completed. So CBO recommendations is to continue funding this project as it was originally scoped, This does leave the Bureau with a shortfall of approximately $260,000 because the scope of the project has changed since the original, since the project began. We recommended funding the majority of the completion of the new comprehensive plan package. We recommended $125,000, which was largely for materials and services and customer service related to the sending of public notices for zoning code changes. We did not recommend the 0.5 staff position, which was it's one-time support to continue funding limited term community outreach and information representative. This is a position that was in the Bureau's budget last year, and because they anticipated completing the project a little bit sooner, had decided to reprioritize funds internally away from that position. So to the extent that this is deemed a priority this year, CBO recommended that the Bureau reprioritize funding for that position. In terms of the general fund reductions, we're recommending for the positions that the Bureau listed related to the Central City 2035 plan and the Transit Corridor plan, we're recommending one-time reduction of these positions. Both of these positions are currently vacant, so they wouldn't result in layoffs. And in recognition of the Bureau's need to continue the funding, continue that stable level of ongoing funding to support ongoing operations, we recommend reducing the Bureau by these positions just for 16-17 and then reinstituting them as ongoing in subsequent budget years. This has the effect of freeing up some general fund resources both for Bureau priorities and citywide priorities, while hopefully not harming the need for the Bureau's ongoing support for FTE. We do not recommend the reduction, the position reduction for the demographic and housing research position. We think that this is actually an extremely critical position to not just planning's operations, but the city as a whole as we look strategically towards the services that we're providing towards all communities and particularly underrepresented communities. And as Director Anderson mentioned, many bureaus have utilized the services of this position, and it's helped inform a lot of, I think, decisions around serving underrepresented communities. And we are recommending the reduction for the sustainability programs. Happy to go into any of our recommendations more if you have additional questions.
I have a comment, and that is that this, I'm glad that we had this presentation the same morning as we had the housing presentation, because clearly we're seeing people living outside and hearing from a lot of people losing their homes, and that's a very compelling case. This Bureau is one where it doesn't do very well in the City Budget Office's recommendations, and I understand why. I know from looking both at the Planning Bureau and at Parks, the challenge is these staff positions and the work is not so visible, and yet it's vital for doing things like getting grants and for addressing a lot of the other questions that we, the council, want solved, and the issues like the design and such. So it's one that we have, again, cobbled together over the last 7 years with one-time funding. And to me, it's one of several bureaus that does fantastic work. I mean, the work you've done on the comprehensive plan, I just can't even express how impressed I am with how well the staff have done on that. Joe and your team have been just phenomenal, and we're planning to get it done by the end of this year. In fact, well before the end of this year, as with the info project. So we should be rewarding good work that's been done, and maybe we can't do it this year with ongoing money. If there is new ongoing money in the April forecast, I agree with Susan's assertion that if we could just bolster the base budget in this Bureau and a couple of others, that we could start getting it again. So thank you very much for the work that you do, and I, for one, am hoping that we do fund staffing positions in addition to looking at some of the infrastructure things that we have to do.
Okay. Other questions? Comments? Steve, please.
I second what Commissioner Fritz said. Just wanted to comment that PBOT is very supportive of the Smart Cities Coordination proposal. That might go without saying, but it's worth saying. And It seems to me that the residential infill project is taking on really important issues, doing really important work. So I don't know if I'm qualified to say whether the number should be precisely 361,000 or whatever it is, but I'd be hesitant to give that project less than the support that it needs.
So I raised a question earlier, Susan, to just maybe get you to comment a little bit on it. In our discussion about housing and about inclusionary zoning, do we have the staff and consulting resources at hand at both the Planning Bureau and the Housing Bureau to assure that we get the comp plan right with respect to the new window that's opened for both requiring inclusionary housing and conferring a sufficient density benefit that it meets the statute's requirement that we provide a betterment in exchange for requiring less than 80% or requiring housing that reaches the community that makes less than 80% of MFI?
So in the comprehensive plan now, there is definitely policy direction in there that would cover all of this. So I'm feeling very confident that we do not need to go back and make substantial changes to the comprehensive plan. In terms of implementation and making sure we're already working hand in hand, I met yesterday for coffee with Kurt for half an hour, who's doing what on inclusionary zoning, and the other pieces that go around that. And it will be a team effort. We do not have the resources right now. Joe's doing it at night. It's not, he was texting me last night going, what are we doing with this? And so it's again, one of those examples, I think you would all agree that we're a really responsive agency. And so we want to get the work done, and we've been waiting for years to do some of this work. And so we are ready to go do it. But at some point, for example, for that project and others as they come through, whether it's Northwest Parking or whatever, what we end up doing is pulling off bits and pieces of people and either burning them out. And if those people happen to be the ones that are one-time funded, they can't, they want to stay, but they don't. So I think we're okay on a policy perspective on that question.
Related to this housing conversation, it seems to me there's three tools that the city has. We have publicly funded housing, which we talked to Kurt about this morning. We have publicly incentivized housing, which we're talking about in terms of these zoning overlays. And then we have the restrictions that we put on just market rate housing, which really falls a lot into your bureau. Also BDS, and we can maybe ask the same question to them later on today. But are we as a city doing enough when it comes to looking at cost-benefit analysis of what it costs to do market rate housing? Because, if we had 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 more units tomorrow, housing would be a lot cheaper in the city. And it doesn't matter if those units don't have to be affordable. They could be market or even luxury rate housing, but just the supply and demand would play a factor. When we talk about the comp plan, have we used that lens to sort of look at that? Because we do a lot of things in the city of Portland to make the city more livable, and that's been our sort of mantra for decades, and we're living in this wonderful city as a result. But some of those livability requirements also decrease affordability. Has that cost benefit analysis been done for the comp plan, and are there any efforts going forward to sort of say, what can we do to reduce the cost of just housing in general, of building housing in general, to make it easier and therefore cheaper?
So two answers right away. One is our job is to get the rules right so that we can make sure that we can indeed build as much housing as possible, but do it in a way that promotes livability and balances with all of our other goals. And that's what we're doing in the comprehensive plan. That's what we're doing in the central city plan, and more explicitly in the mixed-use zoning code when we're actually writing the code. And so I feel like we're doing a really good job comparatively, especially to other West Coast cities, in terms of making sure we get the rules right and doing that hopefully in an expeditious manner over the next year or two so that people know what the rules are and that development can go forward. When you look at the price of any new development, you're looking at the price of the structure, and then you add on SDCs, and you add on potentially now an affordable housing sort of, not linkage but the inclusionary zoning sort of piece. We're looking at, there's a stack of costs that go into doing that. And it does make sense to look at all of those as a part of And I think BDS, I think we're less involved in that than BDS is a part of that, and the other bureaus, the infrastructure bureaus. Lower income and more affordable housing, especially 60% and below, is not predominantly in the city new publicly funded housing. It's older housing. It's just, or more people fitting. It's, a family of 7 fitting in a 2-bedroom apartment. That's what and in most cities in the U.S. and around the world, that's how we do, the more affordable housing. So it's absolutely imperative that we do what you were talking about this morning, but it's absolutely imperative that we grow the pie, that we are able to, in a livable manner, build more housing. And I think you're right on in that.
I want to comment on that question because intuitively, yes, it's supply and demand. The challenge is there isn't a finite amount of demand, that we have lots of people coming from California who are selling their tiny little studios and buying McMansions here. 95% of our new units last year were luxury, and they're still flying out the door. So I don't think it's as simple as if we just build more and if we lower our standards so that we can build more. I think Susan I agree with Susan's analysis that what we really need to do is think about how do we preserve existing housing, how do we divide it up so that more families can live in a big old home, and that's part of what the Planning Bureau is working on.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say, and I'm coming at it much more from sort of the economic perspective, you're right, there is absolutely more demand, but more supply would help with that. And often what we hear from the community is this frustration, although they tore down a $300,000 house and put up 2 $500,000 houses, thus making the community less affordable. That's absolutely false. Putting up 2 or $500,000 houses is actually adding to the housing supply, and those people who wanted to live in Portland, whether they're Intel workers or people from California, would be buying $500,000 or $400,000 houses or $300,000 houses if those aren't available. And so, I mean, I think that overall, and it's only one solution. There's publicly incentivized and publicly subsidized housing as well. But I feel like, and maybe I'm channeling my inner Fred Miller here, there's not, we as a city, I know.
Wait a second, we're going to pause for an intervention.
We as a city, I don't think we talk about this quite as much in terms of the costs we put on housing to make the city more livable. Also, in some cases, make it less affordable. And all I'm saying is I think as a city, we need to make sure that planning and BDS and Housing Bureau, that we're all doing that cost-benefit analysis so that you all, when you're making that decision, can be very aware of whether it's going to drive up costs or not.
I can't resist, because this is an interesting discussion, but just to Amanda's point, 20 years ago, someone came into my neighborhood in Portland and broke the $200,000 barrier on the purchase price of a house, the Grant Park area. And that was me. And a lot of people in my neighborhood thought we had overpaid for our house. 20 years ago, $200,000 was sort of that sort of Maginot line. Today, the market price for a bungalow in my neighborhood is between $700,000 and $750,000. I would respectfully say to some of my friends in the development community, that is not just the result of SDCs and fees. It's the market. And the problem that we have as a city is the one factor we don't control in housing is called the market. Dan can boost production to 5,000 new homes tomorrow. If we hit a recession, we're not going to keep pace. Your question about affordable housing, look at the money we've spent. What do we have to show for it? Well, only about 13,000 people who've gone from the streets to homes. But we did that during the worst recession in our lifetime. If I told you that during the Depression we could keep 13,000 people from being on the streets, you'd say that's a huge success. Instead, what we say is, well, there's still homeless people, so have we invested wisely? It does, in almost every regard, go back to something we have no control over, which is market forces. And I do think that, to Amanda's point, we are starting to hear this siren call that if we lower standards, lower fees, and cut red tape, and we support some red tape cutting, but just across the board, which our developer friends have been advocating always, consistently, that somehow we'll solve the affordable housing crisis. I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that doesn't just result in a larger premium on the sale of a house, but the market sets the price. And as long as people are coming, as Steve likes to say, as long as people with a lot of money are willing to come in and overpay in desirable neighborhoods, the market is setting the barrier. Yes, we want a rational cost system, yes, we want to think about, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure we make a big dent here unless we make a massive investment in social housing, that's been the experience across the globe. Unless we invest in a permanently affordable stock of social housing, I don't think waiting, relying on the vagaries of the market is a particularly good strategy for digging out of this hole. That's just my 2 cents.
Good discussion. Let's steer back to the Planning Bureau budget for a couple more minutes and then move on.
I just want to make just a comment to planning and sustainability that David Douglas has been very pleased with the extra effort your planners have gone in and working with us because of our capacity issues. Unfortunately, back in '96, they changed a lot of zoning that had a lot of unintended consequences. So we're really pleased. And your East Portland liaison, can I say names? Chris Garzello has been wonderful to work with. If I have an issue or a question, because I get a lot of the community come to me with a question, her response is so quick that I can either refer them on to someone in your bureau or another bureau or whatever. But we as a school district that comprise a large majority of East Portland are really appreciative of you looking at the displacement issue, the affordable housing issue, and our school capacity issue, and looking at that in relationship to the comp plan. I do want to make kind of a comment about you saying housing prices. East Portland's supposed to be low income, low housing prices. I saw one in Cherry Park, which is just east of 205, that was listed for $400,000. So that gentrification is creeping very rapidly. I know my own house went down with the market, and now it's up and above what it was when the market went down, and I'm way out on 135th. So it's the market is causing our prices to go up.
So I want to thank Susan and her team. Just a quick comment from me. Susan's proposal to use fees to support some of the code-related planning work is something that I want us to give careful consideration to. I think it's always problematic in our collective management of our bureaus that sometimes we end up punishing good behavior. And Susan has been particularly assiduous and creative in coming up with grants and outside funding for what the Planning Bureau does, which then makes some of their staff and programs more vulnerable in the budget process. And so, in effect, we've been punishing her as a manager for being particularly helpful to the city in bringing in new resources. So I'm very sensitive to that point. I just want to say we're going to take a very close look at that proposal. Thank you for putting it on the table. I think we all appreciate the fact that you have been so creative. You and your whole team have been creative in coming up with, whether it's Metro grants or other ways to augment what we do without necessarily calling on the general fund at every term. So credit for good work. We'll try to have it actually show up in dollars someday, maybe this year. Thank you. Let's move on, please, to ONI. And we have some Budget Advisory Committee members here, as well as Amalia and her team. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. ONI's mission is to promote a culture of civic engagement by connecting and supporting all Portlanders working together and with government to build inclusive, safe, and livable neighborhoods and communities. For us, expanded civic engagement supports greater equity in decision-making and service delivery. ONI's total base budget approximately is $9.3 million. Over half of our budget lies in our most core program area, which is civic engagement and leadership development programs, and those focus on increasing the number and diversity of people involved in civic governance. In the past, ONI and our BAC have always considered the budget climate when developing our requested budget, and we've been very conservative in our asks. This year, our ask is larger than in past years, and the reason for that is that our BAC decided it was a priority to begin to let council know the direction in which we're going and where our priority growth areas are. We understand that in the current budget climate, we're not expecting that all of our requests will be funded, but we wanted to begin to let you know which way we're going. ONI has grown substantially over the past several years with the addition of some programs. While positive, the new program additions also have placed a strain on very limited administration that hasn't grown with the volume and complexity of the work. Our new programs are noise control, marijuana licensing. The new Portlander program was transferred over and expanded to our bureau. Youth Commission, the Multnomah Youth Commission, the Diversity and Civic Leadership Program was expanded this year as well to add an additional partner, and the East Portland Action Plan was added to our budget. ONI's programs leverage a substantial amount of resources in terms of volunteer hours. Conservative estimates have it at $7 to $8 million annually. That is leveraged by the investment that we make in volunteer work at the community level. We are once again proud of our BAC process. It involves 64 people and representing organizations and communities. I'm going to let Antonio, who is one of our BAC members, is here, talk a little bit about that BAC process.
So, thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here and have this opportunity as a people of color, be sitting here in this table. So, my name is Antonio Ramirez. I work for Latino Network as a Leadership and Integration Program Manager. And this was my first year that I participated with ONI back in the process of finding the ways to continue going to equity in our city. So as DCL partners, we believe that the wonderful work that the city of Portland is doing towards equity and the work that the ONI is doing towards the same goal is really important. Thanks to the support that we get from ONI, we are able to engage more and more people, Latino community, in the places where decisions are made. And I just want to say how appreciative we are for the support that we are getting from ONI, particularly myself as a first-year participant in the process. I really got wonderful support from Amalia, from Amy, from all the staff of ONI in order to be included in the process. So I just want to say thank you, and I am the living proof of equity's work in the city of Portland.
So this year, we had, of those 64 people that were engaged in the process, many of them potentially had competing interests. But in the end, the participants were once again unanimous in their support for the budget that we turned in and in their desire to see programs such as the East Portland Action Plan and the Diversity and Civic Leadership Program, Disability, and the Multnomah Youth Commission held harmless in our cut, in our requested budget and our cuts this year. One of our major challenges has been addressing funding equity in our programs. There is inequity among the coalitions. For example, East Portland Neighborhood Office is serving a population that is now larger and more complex than when the funding was originally set for that program. Inequity also exists between our existing neighborhood system and the newer non-geographic partners, or DCL partners. And so we prioritized cut and add packages using an equity lens to ensure that we weren't going to increase that inequity and make that gap larger. I also wanted to mention that we had developed a series of principles together with our commissioner at the beginning of our BAC process that talked about how we were going to approach what we were doing. And this set of principles was intended to carry forward to future years so that we did not have to keep repeating those. So very quickly, we acknowledge that our programs are not adequately funded. We continue to hold moving towards achieving equity as our highest priority. We talked about how we would not take money from one organization to fund another, that we would not increase the burden on our most underfunded partners, that we would try to safeguard individual people currently employed doing jobs as much as we could, that we would recognize that there are many organizations that are part of our system, such as Resolutions Northwest, Elders in Action, our disability and youth programs, and that those were going to be were not going to be disproportionately cut either. That we would not take cuts in ONI that were not shared by staff in other bureaus. So, for example, things like cutting COLA or taking furloughs or reducing salaries. We weren't going to do that unless the city looked at it as a citywide issue. That we would think about the whole system rather than only our own slice. And I'm really proud of the way that people on our back really did that. Many people advocated for other programs rather than advocating for their own. That we saw that more this year perhaps than in past years. So moving to the reduction packages, we had put in a request for the city to consider funding a couple of our programs through the overhead model, Disability in New Portlander specifically. This would have resulted in a savings to the general fund of about $156,000. The decision was not to accept those as overhead funded programs. That was the recommendation of the overhead committee. We respectfully disagree with the overhead committee and hope that we can continue this conversation. At this point in time, the New Portlanders program, their Equity in Practice program, has worked with 10 bureaus, connecting them with newcomer community partnerships, providing services mostly in East Portland, such as mobile playgrounds, safe routes to school, community gardens, etc. The disability program has worked with 8 bureaus and some council offices on citywide policy and program issues. Both these programs actually also help us to meet our Title VI and Title II commitments. The savings that would have been generated from these programs being accepted as overhead funded would have resulted potentially in us being able to keep a crime prevention position, which has instead been recommended for cut. That position was going to focus on organizing within communities of color and other groups that are not served sufficiently by more traditional public safety organizing methods. Given the police staffing challenges that are going on, this could be a double whammy for some of our communities, so I wanted to make sure and point that out. The reduction of our graffiti removal services eliminates over a third of the funding available for free removal services. Again, with recent staffing changes in police to the dedicated graffiti officers, we are concerned that Portland is reducing both cleanup and enforcement, which might make us a larger target for vandals in the future. Other priority ad packages that we put forward, there was a housing pilot engagement program. Mayor, I think you talked about YIMBY in your State of the City address, the Yes in My Backyard. Well, there's a growing movement among our community partners of people that really want to be part of the solution of this houselessness crisis. And so we put forth a proposal that was admittedly vague, but our partners are still working on coming up with the details for that proposal. We've talked with the Housing Bureau and met with them to talk about how we might complement and supplement the kind of outreach that they're doing to get information out as to how people can get engaged in becoming part of the solution. The proposal that we are working on, that our partners are working on, includes convening 6 major events, 50 small group meetings, all with facilitation from Resolutions Northwest. And their professional mediation skills, we hope, result in more meaningful community conversation and not just transfer of information. Community building grants to the tune of about $197,000 includes funding for 3 high priority programs, the Neighborhood Small Grants, which is a best practice. It's been added and taken over the years. That was on the table for cuts, again, because it doesn't result in someone losing a job. There's also the Youth Action Grants, which give small amounts of money to local schools to work with their school communities on what violence issues are going on in their communities and how they can troubleshoot and become part of problem solving those issues for that specific school community. And then the New City Voices Grant, which offers smaller grants to diversity and civic leadership partners who are not currently funded. So those are smaller and emerging nonprofits and mutual assistance associations. In terms of staffing, we are priority staffing through the back and through our internal process, identified the public involvement best practices in youth development programs. The public involvement best practices position was the higher priority. It currently is serving one staff person, is serving 8 major bureaus, receiving significant support. Citywide, doing citywide procedural and best practice model development with an emphasis on racial equity. So this particular staff coordinator was working with the CEC, has been very involved in the development of the city's equity goals, and working with the Title VI coordinator to develop a framework for implementation for community engagement focused goals, and is leading our racial equity roadmap process. And she is also staffing the development of policy recommendations to the Public Involvement Advisory Council. If we had a new staff person, that person would be able to focus on analyzing and developing improvements to our current city public notification policies and practices citywide, the development and implementation of improved digital engagement strategies, the assessment of our city boards and commissions' composition, structure, function, and effectiveness, and the development of more racially equitable and effective public involvement practices in city bureaus. The Accessibility Fund for Earning Programs was a fund that helped us pay for interpretation, translation, and childcare. This has been a critical component of EPAP's success, and they've been pushing the city to look at ways to do that citywide. We had that fund, lost that fund, and that was also put in our budget request, but not recommended. And I will leave it there if you have questions for us.
All right. So I will briefly walk through CBO's recommendations. So the City Budget Office did recognize that the limited central administrative capacity of the Bureau, as they have grown in complexity and size, has become a significant challenge in keeping up with some of their core functions, and as a result have recommended some staffing increases to support their administrative functions. We recommended funding a management analyst in the Bureau's central administration to specifically address issues related to the administrative capacity around their grants funding, and particularly the City Budget Office was interested in this position also helping the Bureau and its partners work on their performance management ability to be able to better process and communicate the impacts of the investments for the important work that the Bureau and their partners are doing. We also recommended converting the mental health specialist position from a limited term position to an ongoing position. To date, that position in just a year has provided trainings for over 330 city employees on how to work with individuals with lived experience of mental illness. And has plans to expand their trainings for all city employees through City Learner. We recommended the administrative support position for the crime prevention program. That's the largest program within ONI. They currently have 12 program staff and a program manager that are located off-site, and they have no administrative capacity or capability currently. And the program manager oftentimes is the person who's answering the phones, answering the door, and it makes it very difficult for them to do the sort of strategic planning, the planning around performance metrics and equity planning for that division. We are recommending that the Bureau fund internally, either through program carryovers or through increased revenues, the requested livability program office support specialist position on a one-time basis. So this is the position that was approved on a one-time basis during the fall supplemental budget to help the NOISE program, the liquor licensing program, with some of their administrative needs. So the plan is to use some internal sources to fund that position on a one-time basis while the Bureau considers their fee schedule for NOISE revenues to fund that position on an ongoing basis. And then we're recommending that the Bureau process a program carryover for the New Portlander. They requested a second position for the New Portlander program that was funded in the current year as a limited term position, but it has not yet been hired. So CBO is recommending that we capture the savings from not having that person fill that position through this year and put that towards completing that position's role as it was originally scoped, and then reassessing the ongoing nature of that need next year. In terms of the reductions put forward by the Bureau, we did not recommend taking the community building grants, the $103,000 for community building grant program. That program will, in the current year, it's estimated to produce 53 grants. Prior grant cycles have resulted in 55% of the grants being awarded to projects addressing engagement with underrepresented communities. So we saw this as a big way to impact equity. Specifically, CBO also looked at this as a way to link the new management assistant position and their role in helping administer grants and work on performance metrics. Linking the recommendation for that position to also this grant program to help work with the partners and ensure that we're again capturing the impact of these grants and of all the partner programs, not just on bureau goals or partner goals, but also on citywide livability and equity goals. Happy to answer any other questions related to our
Just have
recommendation.
some clarifying questions.
Yeah.
Obviously, I didn't understand the budget instructions, so I didn't load these correctly in terms of the reductions, so they were all lumped together.
Okay.
The three pieces of the 5% reduction that we were required to put forward were the one crime prevention position, the graffiti abatement funds, and the small grants. And of those colleagues, the CBO is recommending not cutting the small amount for small grants, but cutting the crime prevention position and graffiti abatement. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. I didn't understand, though, in the commentary you just gave us, Jessica, you mentioned several that you were recommending for one time, but in your recommendations, I'm only seeing ongoing recommendations. I don't see anything down there for one time.
So the one time are we recommended that the Bureau process through the spring bump a program carryover of funds that they have currently in the current year and appropriated them towards next year's budget. So they will be available in next year's budget on a one-time basis through action that will be taken during the spring bump.
That's the only one. The others you are recommend, like the mental health specialist is recommended for ongoing funding.
That's correct.
Okay, and colleagues, I'll be coming back to you in the spring bump. Some of the money that's being suggested to be carried over has already been spent on the program that it's supposed to be spent on this year, so it's not available to be carried over. It's kind of unfortunate this is the end of a 3-hour marathon session here, because I don't know about you, but my head is kind of spinning with all the different options here. So I'll let others ask questions and then I'll come back.
So you're proposing to add 4 positions, or to save 2 and add 2 new positions funded through the overhead model. And I guess what's the rationale? I mean, every bureau would love to be funded through the overhead model, and some bureaus, in fact, like Equity and Human Rights and Bureau of Human Resources, are in fact funded through the equity model. But this seems really as sort of throwing up your hands saying we can't figure out how to do it any other way, let's throw it in the overhead model. I don't see a clear rationale.
Sure. So my understanding is that when we fund programs through the overhead model, it's because they serve an internal purpose. So their purpose is to be the client, if you will, for that program are the internal city services and bureaus, as opposed to these programs being externally facing. Both these programs, disability and New Portlanders program, are internally facing. Right now, for example, the New Portlanders program is working with 10 city bureaus on best practices for engaging emerging communities in Portland. Portland's a gateway city. So that will only continue to grow as a need for us as a city in terms of how we best engage people who are new to the city, who may not speak English, who don't know how to connect with city services. Right now it's 10 bureaus, but it's open to any bureau who would like to access the service. We have staffing constraints, and so we haven't marketed it as we probably could with all our fellow bureaus, so the number could very well rise. Disability is the same. It's providing policy advice to city bureaus around meeting the ADA and around the transition plan. And so, again, clients are internal to the city and not externally facing. That's the reason why those 2 specific programs were put forward. We expect that the number of bureaus that engage with these programs are going to continue to grow.
So that's 2 of the 4 positions. 2 of them are just simply
They're-
your way of
They're all
accounting for your
within.
cut.
They're all within this program. These 2 programs. These are the positions within these 2 programs.
I guess my other question is, I mean, there's a lot of talk about best practices, and you have somebody already funded through the overhead program who staffs the Public Involvement Advisory Committee, which has been around for at least 10 years. I mean, 7 or 8 years. So I guess my point is, haven't we sort of exhausted all the best practices possibly out there for neighborhood involvement and take that person and put them on the New Portlanders program instead?
Yeah, there's actually a fairly long list. So the Public Involvement Advisory Council is made up of city staff and community people. And this group has generated a list of things that they still need to focus on. So, for example, right now, there are questions about how to use new technology to engage community and government together, and what equity implications that has. So that's an entire arena that still needs to get looked at. We currently have a system of boards and commissions that we don't know enough about in terms of their composition and how they function. We hear anecdotally that people get engaged and then drop out because they don't feel like they understand what's happening, or that they're oriented properly, or that they have a voice or a say. So that's been something that's risen to the surface as something that we need to look at. We're investing city resources in sustaining the system, so find out how to make it work better. All those things take time and research. It takes a lot of sort of facilitation of people, all of whom have pieces of knowledge about these things. So there are a lot of things still that we need to improve in terms of the ways that the city engages with community in making its own program and budgeting decisions and policy decisions. So we don't feel like, if it is a finite process, we don't feel like we've hit that place yet in terms of figuring out how to standardize so that people who want to get engaged with the city have a consistent experience of what it means to get engaged with the city, and that city staff have the support and the knowledge they need in order to properly be able to engage and effectively be able to engage the community.
And my last question, do you feel that position is more important than an additional position for the New Portlanders program?
So the New Portlanders program, when we were working with the mayor as our commissioner, the New Portlanders program proposed, and the mayor's office agreed, that they were to develop a commission to work citywide on policy issues. Again, Portland being a gateway city, we are only seeing increases in numbers of people that are coming in who are foreign-born. And so with the engagement of a commission to work as an advisor to city bureaus as well as council on policy issues regarding New Portlanders, there comes with it a request or a requirement for there to be a staff person who is able to do the research for this commission and help them develop policy recommendations that actually make some sense for council to implement. So it's a little bit of a Sophie's choice. It's very difficult to decide sort of which child you love more than the other or need more than the other. We're putting forward requests that support the programs that have been handed to us in the best way possible for you all to consider as you consider, the mayor considers putting forward his proposed budget, and then all of you consider having that discussion with the mayor.
This actually is not a comment for this year's budget, but it's something I've been meaning to ask about for years and just keep on forgetting, which is one of the complaints we periodically hear about the neighborhood association scheme is that the only people who show up at neighborhood associations are white homeowners over the age of 50. Now, I know that that's a stereotype that is probably not entirely accurate, but I think in some cases there might be a grain of truth. I was wondering if there might be a way to structure the budget for the neighborhood associations in a way that provides incentives for them to seek diversity. So to say, for example, that each neighborhood association demonstrate that the extent to which they are representative in terms of renters versus homeowners, whether they reflect the ethnic diversity of their actual neighborhood boundaries, et cetera, and frankly, give more money to neighborhood associations that are where the involvement is truly representative of the broader community and less to those where they're not.
I'm not going to touch that one. But as I do want to comment just very quickly on our fraternal twin here, and the majority of their work is outward facing. In their request, in their ad package for money for accessibility funds, my comment is just this. Last year, as CBO noted, we administered a $100,000 fund for translation, for interpretation services, for ADA compliance and accessibility. And that's a piece of what I'm understanding that ONI was wanting with this fund. My point is generally that bureaus need this money. All of the money we put out last year was gone. And I'm guessing it would all be the same this year. So I'm just suggesting that the city as an entity, council as an entity, needs to determine how or if there's an importance to setting aside a pot of money so that bureaus can tap into, because we're only getting more and more people who will need translation and interpretation services who are engaging with this city. And bureaus don't necessarily budget for that, and then there's a loss of ability to engage. So I just suggest that this isn't going to go away. It's only going to get more impactful and larger.
Commissioner Fish.
I want to stress what you just said. In fact, EPAP came forth with, because of the need for translation and interpretation, etc., that making it more of an administrative part of every budget, 1%, let's say, just throwing out a number, so they do it. One of the biggest complaints we get in East Portland, where we are predominantly, a lot of those immigrants are, is there's a couple of things with engagement, is they end up going to meetings, and that bureau, because they have to have a public meeting, can check it off, but there isn't anything translated for the minorities, and most of the time it's just to give out information. It's not to seek input. In fact, often they feel that their input is totally ignored. So that's something as a city we need to always do. And it's not just the city. I know the school district ends up with some of these similar complaints. It's important that when you call it engagement, you're really engaging, not just putting out information. And a lot of these minorities aren't as vocal because they don't know how to be vocal. But the interpretation in East Portland, I kind of like your idea in the neighborhood, is in East Portland, because of the poverty level, EPAP has found that by providing food at a dinner time meeting and child care, as well as interpretation as requested, and sometimes it can be spendy, we're successful. I think we had the lowest attendance this month at our meeting. It was 45 people. Usually we have 75, anywhere from 50 to 75 people. We're talking for 5 solid years of diverse people of different languages. So I think it is a good model to look at, and it may be all around through the city with the different bureaus, but that interpretation and those translations, and it's required by federal law in a lot of the translation, but we've had people who have said to us, bureau people who said, I don't have time to translate it, or we can't afford to translate it. So if there's a large Latino population planning it, they don't get to hear it. So I really encourage that. I also, I looked at specific things like the grant, the Gravity Cut and the grants program, and I personally feel there's programs that we really need to look at how much are we leveraging. And some of these programs you may leverage 2, 3, 4, 5 to what the dollar is in community involvement. And so I think whenever we're looking at funding any kind of programs, is it leveraged? Because it's important. If it's leveraged, you're really getting a lot more bang for your buck. So I feel that should be done as well.
A couple questions, and I apologize if I already missed this discussion. The new Portlander program specialist position, according to the CBO's analysis, ties it to when and whether the council becomes a commission. When is it your intention to come to council to discuss this issue?
I think it's May 17th.
Okay, so it comes in May 17th. My prediction is it will be enthusiastically supported. And then, as I understand, the specialist position would perform general functions but also be the liaison to the commission?
Yes, that would be staff to the commission.
Okay, and by the way, I don't know who drafted this commission proposal document, but it's outstanding in terms of answering all the questions one might have, very comprehensive. The one thing I did want to ask you, though, and Commissioner Fritz has raised this in other contexts, why are you proposing term limits?
So part of what we want to do is we're focused on leadership development. And so what we want to do is we want to give people an opportunity to serve and grow their leadership through service, and then hopefully plug them into other opportunities across the city and make opportunities available for other new emerging leaders to also have that experience. So for us, the issue of term limits is about making as much opportunity as possible for as many people as possible to actually put their leadership into action.
It was, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to quickly touch on what Commissioner Novick brought up, in that we've heard the same criticism over years, and together with our coalition partners, I mean, remember, there's 95 neighborhood associations, and change happens, but it doesn't happen overnight. And so together, we developed the proposal to create the Diversity and Civic Leadership Partners. We created the proposal to bring in the small grants program, which has been probably the single most catalyst for engaging people who have not historically been engaged with the neighborhood system. So we are constantly troubleshooting, problem solving, trying to pilot programs to do exactly what it is that you brought up. And so any thoughts and any suggestions that you might have for us to consider, we certainly would be happy to consider. But just to let you know that this is something that we are constantly working on, and DCL Partners and the small grants have been two things that really have energized that portion of the neighborhood system.
And as Freda pointed out, we know exactly how to do this. We need money for translation. We need money for childcare. We need money for food. That's what East Portland Action Plan has. It has $300,000, and they use some of their money wisely on small grants, and they use some of it on those services. So that's why we were asking to have that funded. It's not fair to ask volunteers to not only give their time, but also to find the money to pay for those services. I misspoke. It's May 18th, not the 17th, for the New Portlanders Commission coming in. It was Claire Adamsick working with the leaders of that proposed commission who put this together. So I appreciate your commendation on that. So as Amalia said, we are putting forward our long-term strategic proposal because ONI is one of those bureaus which is grossly underfunded for what it's expected to do. I was surprised to hear Commissioner Saltzman saying we have to choose between the Public Involvement Advisory Council and the New Portlanders Council, and expecting that best practices are one and done. Best practices are not one and done in any other realm of what we do. They're constantly evolving, and we need to be aware of what the opportunities are, and then we need to fund them. So when we said we put forward a recommended budget, we actually don't recommend any of our cuts. We think that there are significant problems with cutting both crime prevention and the graffiti abatement services. We acknowledged in our budget process that we actually couldn't meet all of the values that we set out. So, for instance, the graffiti abatement reduction will result in somebody in the community losing their job. It won't be somebody in the city office, but it's still somebody's job who currently is doing valued work, which reduces crime in our community. So thank you for your consideration. I think we'll have lots more discussion, particularly on the overhead model and on the way that community engagement is part of everything should be part of everything we do. We're offering with our housing ask to use our current expertise and our current systems to help get the word out about what community people should know about the Housing Bureau's proposal on Home Forwards and what they can do to engage in it. we don't have to, and we shouldn't reinvent that wheel. We have structures and partnerships that are already ready to do that, and that's what we're asking for. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you all very much. My proposal is we power forward and have the OEHR presentation, and then we'll resume our afternoon session at 1:15. Is that going to work? And let's do just that. Thank you, Amalia and team. Thank you very much. Okay. Dante, you get the back clean up. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon now and present our budget for the next fiscal year. With me are Paul Stewart, who's our budget analyst, who's also a housing staff. Thank you. With me this afternoon are Paul Stewart, who's our budget analyst, who's a housing employee that we use liberally and pay for a good bit. And also Ms. Lakeitha Elliott, who is here. She's a member of our Budget Bureau Advisory Committee, so we're happy that she's here with us this afternoon. It's, again, my pleasure to present the budget. It reflects continued growth as a bureau and continued and greater utilization by city staff, bureau leadership, and council offices. If you recall last year's presentation of our annual report, at least one of you commented on your surprise at how much we do with so few staff. So guess what? I'm back. And by the way, we'll be presenting our annual report tomorrow morning. So had that happened maybe before this, I'm sure you would have just given us anything we asked for. So this past year has seen the office take on and accomplish even more, and this budget reflects that. I'd first like to thank my staff and the staff at the budget office for really assisting in this process. And probably just like every other bureau, we believe that our office and our specific office needs to be unique and vitally important to the city. Our role is to assist all bureaus to engage in equity dialogue, evaluation, and analysis. We have done this with a total of 9 FTEs, 1 full-time temporary position that we will lose this June, which has been overseeing the city's Title II transition plan, and 1 part-time permanent administrative position, which we just added this January. This past year, we underwent a reorganization to become more efficient, and several staff have taken on additional responsibilities once the Equity 101 training became mandatory for all city employees. We worked to cross-train some of our employees to assist in fulfilling this requirement of training, and it was work that they took on in addition to all of their other duties. We have 1 full-time administrative staff who is my executive assistant. My executive assistant, who was with this office for over 3 years, recently took a promotional opportunity as a program assistant in the Water Bureau. The depth and breadth of her work for me allowed her to gain the experience necessary to move into this higher classification for the very first time.
Mr. Director, will that transition in any way affect your commentary when it comes time for the utilities to present to their budget presenter?
It just may do that, sir. Yes, yes. Okay. So her move actually reflects the amount of work that having only 1 administrative person actually had to do in this office. The funding for the part-time administrative position has been helpful, and this budget asked that it be funded as a full-time position. In order to meet our expected 5% cut, this position was offered but not recommended by CBO as a cut, although no additional funding was offered for the position. Our overall focus this budget is twofold: improving our staffing with the goal of aligning our model of equity assistance with a model similar to the City Budget Office or the Bureau of Human Resources. And 2, to obtain ongoing program funding for Portland's Black Male Achievement Initiative. The CBO HR model would provide OEHR the opportunity to have individual staff work with a portfolio of bureaus and become more conversant and knowledgeable in a specific content area. Currently, our staff are specific subject matter experts in the ADA, in training, in human rights issues, in Title VI, in BMA, and in equity analysis. This budget request would allow us to add at least another staff analyst to begin this process. And as an aside, I'll say there's been conversation among other bureaus, and you may even see some in Bureau budget requests to add an equity manager or an equity person in their staff. And we don't see that as the best model moving forward in terms of really being sustainable and then maintaining the consistency of how this initiative is rolling out through the city. The BMA was moved into our office last year with one-time funding, but without an ongoing program budget. Our work with the Summer Works program, our work in sponsoring workshops or conferences such as the national convening of other BMA cities from around the country that culminated in a well-attended hip-hop conference here at City Hall, and the upcoming Black Men and Boys Healing Summit, sponsored in collaboration with Multnomah County, all demonstrate the need for an ongoing budget for this program. So I'm absolutely pleased that the work of the office is seen as a true value added by the bureaus and staff, which is what creates the need for the additional staff requests that you've heard this morning. We have been frugal with our budget and efficient and effective with our work as we have become a national model doing this work nationwide. So that's all the remarks I have. Let me also do this. There was a discrepancy in the numbers in our budget, and so maybe if Paul can address that, and then Lakeitha can speak to the budget and request as we've made.
Yes, this question just came up this morning. The $30,000 request, as you'll see perhaps in some of your summary materials here for the BMA ongoing program budget, really only needed to be a $20,000 request. So I think that's essentially that.
Hello. Again, my name is Lakeitha Elliott. Thank you, Mayor Hills and Commissioners, for having me. And a special thank you to Commissioner Fritz for your vision for this office and continued support for this office. And so like Dante said, I serve on the Bureau Advisory Committee and was involved at the Urban League when we first thought that this office would be a great idea. And I'm here to encourage you to ensure that this much-needed office has what it needs to be successful. I'm a coupon shopper, so I'm all for getting as much as possible for as little as possible, but sometimes you have to splurge and be able to, pay full price for what you need. And so I'm asking that you all pay full price for this much-needed office. We've celebrated some wins here. We have the Charles Jordan rule. We have the ban the box and making the equity trainings mandatory. And those are wins, but the real wins will be when we see the outcomes. And so it's okay. It's great to say we're requiring 100% of our staff to have this training, but if we don't have the capacity to offer it, then it's not really a win. It's just words, on paper. And too often we've set goals. And when I talk to my kid about setting goals, I want them to be attainable and measurable. And so I want her to be able to say, not just I set a goal. That's great you set a goal, but did you attain it? Did you do what was needed to make it happen? And so that's what I'm hoping that we're able to do is make sure that this is able to happen, not just that we celebrate the win of these policies passing, but that we're really able to put some action behind those words. Also, that this is the year that the racial equity plan, the 5-year racial equity plans are due across the city. And so wanting to make sure that there's someone there who's able to analyze the information, to support the bureaus and making sure that those things happen is really important. And so advocating for the addition of the racial equity analyst position is really important. So again, I'm just challenging you all to put some action behind the words and to make sure that we're able to not just celebrate that we've set these goals or change these policies, but we're really able to see them come to fruition. So thank you.
I'll keep this very brief. Good afternoon. CBO's recommendations result in, I'm back again, Jane Marie Ford, Assistant Financial Analyst with City Budget Office, and happy to be the analyst for Office of Equity and Human Rights. Our recommendations essentially result in no net change to the Bureau's budget with perhaps a very small adjustment, as was already discussed. We did not recommend the 5% general fund reductions. We also did not recommend funding new additional staff at this time due to limited ongoing general fund resources. But we do support continued exploration of a strategic staffing assessment to identify which staffing model will allow the Bureau to best carry out its policy, program, and training needs. So I'm happy to go into further detail if you have any questions.
More questions?
I just have a comment, and obviously we'll have a more extensive discussion tomorrow. I wanted to comment, Mayor, that I appreciate your support and your leadership of this office over your 4 years here, and that part of what happens next is going to be dependent on who the next mayor is. So that's something that I'll be weighing in my mind as to maybe, I'm glad to see no recommendations for cuts in this office, and we need to have a discussion about where it's going to go next.
I just want to ask, I was surprised to see that individual bureaus were hiring equity for experts without really coordinating that with your bureau. And I was surprised to see that some bureaus don't meet with you. Is that an oversight?
It's
part of the.
Oops, sorry. It's also not really an accurate statement.
Well, it says some bureaus don't meet regularly. So.
Okay. So we meet. My office meets with the equity managers that are in existence, and there's 5 in the other bureaus on a regular basis. Or semi-regular basis when they can attend, but for the most part we meet fairly regularly. Most of the bureaus that now have an equity manager, I assisted at least in the document for the job description and have had these conversations with HR about what that looks like and how to frame it. And HR has their own concerns about what the classification structure would be. So, I think it's important that, having police have an internal equity manager, I think is a good thing, because that's just its own entity that needs someone internal that can do that work. But going forward, it's not something that I think every bureau needs because they don't have the same levels of issues, if you will.
So if I were an equity manager in a bureau, would I coordinate my actions and the bureau's long-term strategy with you, or could I could our bureau set its own and
Could it? Yes.
head off in a different direction?
Could it? Yes.
It doesn't seem the optimal to me.
If the bureaus were doing that, then yes, that would not be optimal, but that's not what they're doing. And it's very similar. And I invented this classification. And
So all of them are, in fact, coordinating their strategy, all the bureau equity managers with...
I think they're all in line with what the office is recommending in setting out the equity roadmap, et cetera, and following their direction. Just as Dante just said that the Police Bureau is a different entity within itself, so is the Bureau of Development Services, so is Parks. And in those 2 bureaus, which I established the equity manager position without any additional funding, we reorganized the funding. It's so that it's an assistant to the director. It's at that level to look at the equity issues throughout the bureau and not just a small piece of it. It's everybody in the bureau needs to be thinking in terms of what's the appropriate actions to correct past disparities and promote equity.
Well, maybe I'm not wording my question properly. I understand what you're saying, and I think I'm just... If a bureau decides to go in this direction, but the city is going in this direction, are there any checks and balances?
Yeah,
really
the commissioner in charge.
Yeah, it's really up to us. To make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay.
Yeah, and I haven't seen that happen. I'm not suggesting that at all.
So, Frida?
You talk about you do equity training, which is great. When you're doing your training, is it just, I see equity 2 ways. The internal customers, which are the employees that need to be trained on how to work within their department, the hiring, all that. But then there's also the issue of how they, for lack of more, customer service to the external people. Do they get both kinds of training?
Absolutely.
Okay, and are you doing, once all the, and I know it takes a while, our school district's been doing it, it takes a while to get through all that. Once the training done, how are you going to see if they're actually using it, especially to the external customer?
That's what the equity plans will demonstrate. Each bureau is essentially creating a racial equity strategic plan. It's a 5-year plan that provides action items. And tomorrow I'm going to detail one. The Water Bureau has an excellent one I'm going to show. But action items, who's responsible for it, the time frames within which it will happen, and what the metrics are for those. And so that's a requirement of each of the bureaus. And all of the staff have been involved and engaged in some sense of doing an assessment of their bureau and how they are providing the services externally and how they're doing internally. And then this document is the culmination of that assessment.
Regarding that, because our district just did it, my pet peeve was customer service of front desk people who work with our parents and stuff. And after the training, the superintendent actually, a secret buyer, so to speak. But instead, he had diverse groups, whether they be Latino, Russian, spoke English not, or whatever, actually visited schools and asked basic questions to see how they responded. Were they actually following through with the training that they were receiving? And that's what I'm kind of getting at, because you can train someone, but that doesn't mean they will utilize the training, and that'll segue into the public there that they're interfacing with.
Dante, thank you. I just want to say, this very small organization under your leadership has taken on some new responsibilities that have been quite challenging, supporting the COCL, supporting the Black Male Achievement Initiative, this is a small group of people that just keep saying yes to doing more, and I just want to appreciate the spirit that you and your staff and all that have been doing that work have brought to it, because it would have been easy to say no, and that's, of course, never your answer, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So want to take a 45-minute break or an hour break?
Hour.
Okay. 1:30 to 4:30 instead of 1 to 4. Does that work?
I think we were going to go till 3.
We were going
to go till 3:30 anyway.
1:30 to 4 instead of 1 to 3:30. Does that work?
I'd personally rather take 45 minutes and have some, at least 15 minutes in between later meetings.
Yeah, we have
All right.
Commissioner.
How many bureaus are we doing this afternoon?
How many?
3, Water Bureau and Development Services.
I prefer the hour, but
All right.
you're the mayor for a reason.
1:20. We'll compromise.